All right, everybody, thank you. We'll take our seats. We're going to move along. We do want to make sure we have time for you to take this level of conversation and discussion that you're having into a focus session following our next speaker. So I am pleased to bring to you a speaker that you'll learn a little bit more about. We'll ask Leslie to introduce herself at the beginning of her presentation, but the purpose of her comments really are, now that we understand really the magnitude of this opportunity that we have as a community, to come together on clear issues of importance for our community, but really opportunities for transformational change. We're going to hear from Leslie some key components of that collective impact model that might help you think a little bit differently about this opportunity that perhaps you have for other projects or programs that you've been involved in as an organization. So thank you so much, Leslie. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, y'all, for being here, and I know this is a lot of information to take in. I'm hoping that what I'm going to talk about is really going to tie it together a little bit more in terms of how to put together a project. Where will we get the most impact in the project? Where will we do the most good for the community in any of the areas that are the focus of the Restore Act? And I think some of it's going to be about resetting the bone and changing how we look at things, changing how we think about things, what our perceptions are, what our own personal missions are with our own not-for-profits and within the community. And so I guess the first question is why are we here today? What is it that brings us here today? Is it that we work with not-for-profits that are working together or are working to try to resolve isolated social problems, isolated issues within the community, and we'd like funding to try to achieve that? Or is it because we see these problems within the community, realize that they are complex in nature, realize that there may be needs to look at them in different ways and adapt how we work and to collaborate with others to do that? And so I'd encourage you to kind of open your minds and think less about the money and less about how it's going to benefit each individual organization, and think more broadly about how it's really going to impact the community as a whole and what role your individual organizations may have in terms of that impact. So this is collective impact. This is the summary definition of it. Essentially, it is a commitment, and I underline the word commitment, of a group of actors from different diverse sectors to a common agenda geared to solving a complex social problem. Doesn't really work well for technical problems. For example, if you've got a capital campaign to put a building together, that's probably not collective impact. That's really isolated impact because you're trying to put that building together. But it works better for complex problems. And it really requires this highly structured setting. It requires commitment to that highly structured setting, that there's going to be rules, there's going to be parameters, there's going to be showing up to the table, making sure to follow through with what you say you're going to do, and doing it. And then this last one I think is important because that's really hard. This is that commitment part is really hard. It means really investing not just in your own client base, not just in your own goals, but in the goals of the entire collective impact goal. The website down here is just one of the many resources that has more information on this, and that's where I got essentially this breakdown of defining collective impact and what it is. Just to differentiate collective impact a little bit, I've talked about isolated impact. There may also be a funder collaboration where you have a funder who says, I want you to do this, and that's a collaboration with that funder. That's different because it typically is a very finite problem. Public-private partnerships typically are more narrow-focused issues or problem-solving. Perhaps you've got a multi-stakeholder initiative where you've got several different stakeholders working together and collaborating, but they don't really share measurement tools. They don't look at the same tools at the end of the day as to how to resolve the problem. So there are some other kind of in-betweens between the isolated impact and the collective impact. But the reason collective impact is so important is when you look at issues like the environment and poverty and education and workforce development, those are really complex issues that have so much overlay as to how one piece fits in with the next piece fits in with the next piece, and which do you solve first, and chicken and the egg, and all of that. So to introduce myself a little bit, I work with Legal Services in North Florida. We're a not-for-profit law firm throughout the Panhandle. I'm the senior attorney for the Pensacola office here. I've been here for just a little over 10 years. It may seem odd that a lawyer is up here talking about what is a social issue. I am not a social scientist. I don't pretend to be, don't claim to be. But why is this idea important to us? Why does this matter to what Legal Services does? And that's just a little history on us. I'll let y'all read that on your own time. But at the end of the day, we can't serve everybody who needs legal help. Our goal is access to justice, justice for all, equal access to the courts, those kinds of things. We can only, studies have shown that we only serve about 20% of the people who are eligible and need services. That's not nearly enough, and that's a frustrating place to be as a provider, to know that the resources aren't out there for us to be able to do what needs to be done. And it's frustrating if we have, say, for example, somebody come in today being evicted because they live in substandard housing and chose not to pay the rent, didn't do it right. So they're getting evicted. We do what we can to help that person. And 6 months later, somebody's getting evicted out of the same unit for the same reason because the property wasn't ever repaired. Or a domestic violence relationship where we can't break the cycle and this victim keeps falling into either the same or a different relationship, and those support networks, maybe they're not reaching out, the individual's not reaching out to those support networks in our community. If they're not all connected, if we don't try to solve the problem in a long-term way, are we really solving the problem? And so we have learned that those partnerships within our community are essential to the work that we do to try to help as many people make long-term changes within their community. So, we've looked at this. Are we really achieving our vision of hope and justice for all? Are we really doing that if we're not making sure they're getting connected with those services? There's an awful lot of really good examples of strong collaboration and what is either collective impact or fairly close to it within our community. United Way, I think, has changed how they're funding entities, and they've created these forums around financial stability and education and health to try to help us all problem solve together. Children's Home Society is working on a community school initiative to focus on one school and really create a long-term difference for children coming out of that school. Grace is doing long-term recovery work to try to make this community more resilient and pulling in every entity who may be able to help to do that. The Homeless Coalition is working to try to pull together those who are working with the homeless to try to create long-term solutions to provide housing for this. I could really go on. There's the newsroom is doing a great series on Gulf Coast Kids House and abuse of late. There's so many examples of how working together in that collaborative and collective role can really make a difference. I've talked a little bit already about isolated impact and kind of the difference. Technical problems, just to try to explain that a little bit better, those are ones that are well-defined. You kind of know what the answer is already. You know that you've got this problem that you need scholarship funds for students to go to school. So you set up a fundraising campaign and mechanisms to apply for those programs, and you set that up, and it's a very defined problem. What we're really talking about today, and what I think the Restore Act Committee has put before us, are complex problems and opportunities for us really to take this pot of funds that's become available to us and put together proposals that, if we all work together, can really solve and make a difference in those areas. So I'm going to talk about the 5 conditions of collective impact success. And if you, at the very end of the PowerPoint that's in your packets, there are a lot of resources. The very first one under resources is an article I pulled a lot of this from. It is certainly the cornerstone for a lot of the research and a lot of what's going on with collective impact. But just to go through all 5 of them briefly, the first one is the common agenda. Second is shared measurement. Third is mutually reinforcing activities. Fourth is continuous communication. And the 5th, which I think is probably the most key part, is a backbone support entity that pulls us all together. And so I'm going to talk about them all individually and just kind of summarize what they are. I'm going to try not to read the slides because you can either read them now or read them later, but they're available to you. Shared measurement tools. If we're not measuring things the same way, if we're not looking at, let's skip over common agenda. Let's do that one first. The big thing is that everybody has to agree on what that agenda is. And that doesn't mean everybody has to agree on everything that's a part of that project. There may be disagreements as to why the problem is there, what created the problem, cause and effect, that kind of thing. The important thing is that the goals are agreed on, that everybody agrees on what the goals of the collective group that are going to put together. How will, and to figure out how will, if any, if at all, those disagreements will affect those goals. And if they will, then you got to sort through them and figure out where your common ground is. And how will those disagreements affect the outcomes? And then certainly look at, and in this case look at the county, does the funder have an agenda for what these proposals need to fit into? Are they already engaging in collective? And I think by pulling us together, by doing the workshops that are going to be coming up, I think that there's certainly an awful lot of entities who are interested in making sure that we can create a common agenda. And the workshops that we're going to do, the breakout sessions we're going to do later, that's really the goal for us to start thinking about how we all fit into that. The shared measurement tools, figuring out a way to define what those tools are. What are we measuring? How are we measuring it? How are we going to capture that? And how are the entities who are participating going to be able to support that? And that is, I think, a moving target, and it's something that's going to be worked out over time, but it's something that everybody needs to agree on and work together to create. Mutually reinforcing activities. Sorry. Okay. Nobody's going to be doing the same thing. It's not as if us as legal services is going to be doing the same thing as MANA in giving food, but are we reinforcing each other's positions? If they have someone come in who needs housing because child support stopped, are we reinforcing those issues to make sure that they're getting legal help to get the child support back in play? Are we working with each other and making sure that we're supporting the work and supporting the client base that needs the help? And I don't know if anybody recalls the Unite Escambia campaign that went on through United Way probably 6-7 years ago, and it really started off fantastic and looked at the interrelationship between poverty and health and all of these pieces, and it was a great start, and I think it kind of didn't last because it was big and it was enormous and it was losing that commitment, I think, from the community. But that was a really good starting point to what we're looking at today, is what are those problems and how do they interact and how do we work on those things today, which brings me to number 4, that continuous communication and that commitment. I mean, the articles that I read and really kind of looking at this academically for today really talk about, it's not about just showing up to the meeting and checking the box and signing the attendance sheet and saying you're there. It's about showing up every time. It's about continuity and the person who's there being there every time, not delegating it to somebody who may not have decision-making power within your agencies, not taking a month off because you got other things to do. It really just means making that commitment and making this a part of the work that you and your agency are doing. It also means building trust. We've all got our little silos that we work in, and we may have other people who have silos that look a little bit like ours. And how do we start trusting each other as we put together proposals that we may never even get funded for? I mean, that's really what we're talking about in this proposals is our goal to put together something that's going to work for our community and then down the road help us and our client base, whether we are a part of it or not. And I think that's really that's really changing how we're thinking, but I think it's important to build that trust, and you've got to see each other, whether it's networking in opportunities like this or seeing each other at a gallery night or whatever it is that we're seeing each other, just trying to network, get to know each other, figure out what motivates the others that you may be able to work with. And then 5, and again, I really think this is the big key, because without a backbone, we're not standing. Without the backbone, we don't have anything that pulls us together. I almost think of it as the hub to the wheel. And it is a leadership entity that gathers the statistics, gathers the data, gathers the measurements, calls the meetings, makes sure everything is happening as it is and as it needs to, and really holds everyone accountable for what they're supposed to be doing.
Maybe it is a little bit of a figurehead entity probably as well in terms of being the public image of the project and the proposal. But with this level of a project and with this level of funds available, I don't know very many not-for-profits that have the capacity to pull all this together. I mean, that's a huge undertaking, and it's really going to take thinking creatively about what that backbone organization looks like and does it need to be created. Is it a brand new 501c3 or is it a collaborative of 501c3s? Thinking creatively about what does that look like, who is that? Is it about bringing different expertise into the table and creating it that way? So I encourage you in your breakout sessions to think about that and what that looks like. So there's the website at the top, collaborationforimpact.com. There's several different resources at the back. This is one of them. And I thought this was just a really fantastic chart to talk about how to create it. And we're really we're in phase one. You know, phase one is what's going on right now. We're holding the dialogue and we're trying to figure out where the consensus is to move forward. We're doing all of these things in phase one, developing the proposals. Phase two is probably about where we're submitting the proposals and trying to get the action going and what the decisions are at the county level for what's going to get funded. It's a little bit into phase three probably, but really just making opportunity to pull all these things together. And I thought this was a really good roadmap to some degree for our conversation today in the breakout sessions about what do we need to do and how do we need to put it there. So what's your goal? What are you trying to solve? Whether it's an environmental issue or a workforce issue or a tourism issue, what is it that you're trying to solve and how can you walk through this roadmap to make sure that that happens? Just again, the difference I think between collaboration and collective impact, because I think the terms get thrown around a lot in the same vein and people aren't always talking about the same thing. This is from the Strive Network. I'm going to talk a little bit more about them again in a minute, but these are really the differences between the two. And collective impact is outcomes focused. It's what is down the road, where are we going, what are we trying to improve? It's not just about trying to prove that we helped 20 people with their eviction cases. It's about what have we improved within the community and how have we made their situation better or how have we made the community better. It is not adding something to your workload. It is what you do. It's your goal. It's your mission is to reach these outcomes that you decide as part of the program. I'm trying to avoid the word collective because I keep thinking of Star Trek, so sorry about that. And then to advocate for what works. Ideas are great, and that's fantastic, but if down the road it's not going to get you to these outcomes that you're working towards, where is that long-term outcome? And so really looking down the road and thinking long-term about what that impact is. Here's some identified challenges. I think that we probably are past the first two just because of the nature of the Restore Act. The funders are not wary about paying for infrastructure if it's a proposal that the county decides to accept. They want long-term solutions. So I don't think we're risking a preference for short-term solutions here because long-term solutions are the nature of how the funds are coming in and how it's going to be determined. Will diverse community leaders come to the table? I think that's a question to ask in the breakout sessions. Is what we're proposing going to bring diversity to the table? And there was some discussion earlier about for-profit, not-for-profit, who fits the table. I think that's part of the diversity, but not the only part of the diversity. And so how does this affect the community as a whole, looking at all demographics? Are all demographics going to be able to come to the table and support this? Where is the motivation coming from? Is it coming from, again, that sense of this is a problem that I see within my agency, or is it coming from something bigger? Is it coming from that broader picture of how all of these things work together? And the last point is don't be afraid to be big. I mean, this is a lot of money we're looking at here. These proposals can be big. They can be, some of the examples I'm going to give you in a minute are hundreds of organizations that come to the table and they split off into smaller entities that work together to to focus on certain parts of the problem, but at the end of the day, it's the size of it and it's the commitment of that many entities that makes it work. So I'm going to talk about some examples real quick. I mentioned the Strive Network. That's probably, in part, one of the primary resources, just because it's been so successful. It's it's based out of Cincinnati, and it was educationally based. And the problem is they were realizing that the outcomes for education were lacking, and they tried after-school programs and all these other isolated impact kind of programs that were great and had their own successes, but in terms of the long-term fix, that really wasn't there. And so they pulled together lots of entities. They created 15 different student success networks based on type of activity, such as early child education, tutoring, and they looked at it as a cradle-to-career initiative. And in 4 years from the date of launch, they improved student success in key areas such as, and this is despite when this was going on during the recession and budget cuts, 34 of the 53 success indicators that they tracked showed positive trends, including high school graduation rates, fourth grade reading and math scores, and the number of preschool children prepared for kindergarten. So they realized that was an ambitious mission, but because so many entities came to the table from private and from the private sector, from the government sector, and from the not-for-profit sector, that was able to make it successful. Another example for the environmental piece is Elizabeth River up off the Chesapeake. There was a lot of industrial waste going in, and they pulled together, again, government, private, not-for-profit entities, created an 18-point plan, and this one took a little longer because the environment sometimes is a trickier issue, for more than 1,000 acres of watershed, and let's see, pollution has been reduced by more than 215 million pounds. Concentrations of the most severe carcinogen have been cut 6-fold, and water quality has significantly improved. This is a collaborative that started in 1993, so they're now more than 20 years down the road. But those improvements with 100 stakeholders, that's how many people they brought to the table. 100 stakeholders made the difference. To talk a little bit about health, there was a program in Somerville, Massachusetts to address childhood obesity. And again, educators, businesses, not-for-profits, local interested citizens came together. School district came together, agreed to offer healthier food. Local restaurants started certifying whether or not they had healthy food and what was healthy on their menu. They changed sidewalks. They changed crosswalks. The result was a statistically significant decrease in body mass among the community's young children between 2002 and 2005. This is a fairly short article I'm reading from. This is really the template article, and those examples are in there. One example that I wanted to talk about is also referenced in there. It's called Transform Milwaukee, which focused on economic vitality through public-private investments. And their goal was to improve the city's unemployment levels by creating construction-related and other permanent jobs, diversifying and strengthening local property values, housing stock, retail businesses, manufacturing facilities, to remediate, does this sound familiar? To remediate longstanding flood issues to help rebuild confidence in Milwaukee's stormwater management, to unite transportation networks to boost the shipment of goods and commodities coming out of the Milwaukee region, and to decrease the city's reliance on social service assistance while increasing state and local revenues. And I think some of that echoes what many of us identify in our own communities, and they had 5 key strategies for doing that. To use new and existing financing resources to expand business development and spur job creation, to make neighborhoods more desirable for housing and business development by reducing the number of foreclosed and vacant properties, by increasing job training, skill enhancement, and educational opportunities through partnerships with state agencies and not-for-profits, to prevent future flooding by developing alternatives to storm sewers, such as bioswales and stormwater runoff conveyance systems, and then to direct resources to establish better transportation infrastructure in all areas of transportation: water, air, rail, and highway. Milwaukee's bigger than we are, I get that, But a lot of those same strategies can be implemented here. I think they are being implemented here. I think the question is, are they being implemented in a collective way, or is every entity that's doing those things doing them in their own silos? And is there a way that we can pull those things together through this collective impact discussion? I had one other example I wanted to give you. Does everybody like chocolate? Yeah. Even corporations are doing this. Mars, which makes M&Ms and Snickers and some other things. Don't ask me how I know that. They are working with their competitors to help 500,000 cocoa farmers in Côte d'Ivoire who are economically impacted by the fact that there's not enough chocolate out there. They're not producing enough cocoa. So they're working together to try to improve farming practices, to improve plant stocks so that they can triple their chocolate production. So that's a good thing, right? There's so many opportunities for collective impact to really focus on this broad solution. And so I encourage you, as we go into this next session with the breakout groups, to think about not just what you can bring to the table, but what others can bring to the table to you, and how it all fits together, and what ultimately it resolves as an outcome at the end of this. And I think those, just in my discussions for the limited time I've been participating with the planning group, I think that's where we're going to be able to make the biggest difference within our community. And I'd love to look back 10 years from now and say that this is where it all started, and how much better we are and where we've come from, and to be one of these stories. So I think we're going to open up for questions for the whole group as well.
Yeah, I'd like to go off script a little bit and say too, I'm here to represent our company, Gulf Power Company, that's here hosting us, but I graduated from high school in Escambia County. I went and lived all over this country. When it was time for me to raise a family, I knew where I wanted to raise that family was right here in Pensacola, Florida. And when I think about for my sons and their families that they'll raise, I know all of us here represent organizations, but we also are this community. So what a wonderful opportunity through this tragedy for us to be able to come together to really bring about some significant, meaningful, sustainable, transformational change for the generations to follow us. So thank you, Leslie, for that. Very insightful, and appreciate those resources. Personally, for our community development work here at Gulf Power Company, I will absolutely be following up on many of those resources that you've identified. So this next piece of our agenda is time for us to actually start kind of working through what might these project ideas be, and what would us using that collective impact model feel like, look like, be like for us as a community.